Good afternoon and welcome to ICE Webinars, a cool place for hot topics. Today we are joined by Jessica Chambers, Director of Clinical Operations at SSM Health. Jessica has 22 years of imaging experience and oversees 3 hospitals and 4 outpatient imaging centres. Just a quick reminder to save the date for our 10th anniversary ICE 2024, which will be held at the Hyatt Regency in Irvine, California from February the 18th to the 20th. The Imaging Conference and Expo is the only conference dedicated to imaging directors, radiology administrators and imaging engineers. ICE offers valuable CE credits from the ASRT and ACI and is a unique community of key decision makers and influential imaging professionals. For more details, please visit attendice.com. And if you'd like the chance to be a presenter at ICE 2024, details can be found in the handout section of your webinar dashboard. ICE will also be exhibiting at the AHRA 2023 General Meeting from July 9th to the 12th. Again, more details in the handout section. Today's webinar is eligible for 1 ARRT Category A CE credit by the AHRA. You can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed directly 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once you submitted the survey. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. We'll wrap up today's presentation with a live Q&A, so please submit your question anytime using the questions feature on the webinar dashboard. Let's kick off today's webinar by giving away one of our ICE gym bags to the attendee that can tell me the answer to the following trivia question. June is National Adopt a Cat Month. What is the name of the orange tabby cat who appeared in a comic strip and his own movies? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard, and I'll reveal the answer at the end of the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, Jessica Chambers is our presenter today, and she will be discussing developing a 3D lab to streamline CT workflows. Jessica, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining me today. I first just want to disclose I have no financial interests or relationships associated with this presentation. So first, you guys are all giving up an hour of your time, so I felt I needed to go just over a little bit of my background to explain why I'm qualified to speak to you on this topic. As mentioned, I have about 22 now, this slide's a little old, years experience in imaging. I served in the Air Force as a radiology and CT tech. That's actually where I got my initial training. And then upon separation of the Air Force, I just kind of worked my way up working actually in CT. And that's where I kind of had the brainchild idea of developing a 3D lab, just because of some challenges I was faced with as a CT tech and CT supervisor. It kind of planted the seed. And as I worked my way up through my career progression as a manager and then into a director role, I was able to actually take that idea that I had as a CT supervisor and start to put it into action with a 3D lab. I recently was promoted to a regional director, and as she mentioned, I oversee 3 hospitals and 4 outpatient centers. And I feel that's important because it really demonstrates why a 3D lab can really assist you in your CT departments when you streamline some of this workflow and take it out of your CT departments. So our objectives today, I'm hoping that when you leave this presentation, if you are thinking of establishing a 3D lab, it can kind of go over, and I'll explain to you the financial challenges we had with getting this started within our CT departments, and why a 3D lab is something that you should look at. I'm hoping this audience is either individuals that currently have a 3D lab and maybe want to look at expanding it to multiple locations so that it's not just one centralized lab, or if you don't have a 3D lab, why it might benefit you to start going down that path to look at implementing one in your hospital. And then if you haven't already implemented it, it or if you're wanting to expand it. There are some challenges with that initial justification because it does take some upfront capital, and a 3D lab really isn't generating any revenue for your department. So I kind of put together different justifications that we presented to our C-suite and to our regional leadership to justify why this money is well spent and will in turn have some revenue generation down the road. And so with many things, there's benefits with standardizing. And then I can demonstrate how we grew the lab from just a tiny little lab that post-processed about 9 different studies to we're up to hundreds of different types of studies that we can post-process for all of our departments. And hopefully at the conclusion of this, you can take this information back and either expand your lab or start to put a justification together to start your own 3D lab. I work for SSM Health, and I feel it's important to show our platform to understand why standardization and having a centrally located 3D lab is important. We're in the heart of St. Louis is where our location is. And as you see on the slide, we have hospitals in Oklahoma, Illinois, and Wisconsin as well. So we have a large footprint, very spread out. And so centralizing into a single 3D lab was important to us so that we can really leverage our power and kind of accomplish more with less staff. The 3D lab that we oversee is right now strictly in the St. Louis area. So in the St. Louis area, we have 5 adult hospitals, 1 academic adult hospital, 1 children's hospital, 5 freestanding outpatient centers, and then 1 joint venture. 5 of those freestanding outpatient centers align up under me, and then the other one is tied to a different leader. And so this presentation will show you kind of how, even though I'm not the leader over all of these hospitals, I was able to work with all of these hospitals, and the lab physically sits in my hospital, but we're able to post-process images for everyone. Our fleet of scanners, we have 22 scanners in all of those St. Louis regional hospitals. We have GE, Philips, and Siemens is our primary fleet. The type of scanner really isn't a barrier for us when you can find a single solution that is agnostic to all of the different vendors out there. So that really wasn't a hindrance for us. I have spoken to people that were concerned with standardization of a 3D lab because they didn't have the same CT scanners. But if you can get the right solution in place, I don't think the vendor of scanners is something that should inhibit you from starting to look at this path. There's no reason to standardize your equipment. So the financial challenges that we faced in our departments kind of changed about 3 years ago. Something big happened, and it's called COVID. And when we came out of COVID, all of us that have been in healthcare for 10 plus years, we're all faced with the challenge right now of staffing. If I was in a room with all of you in front of me, I'm sure if I asked a question of how many of you are fully staffed in your CT department, I would be shocked if more than half of the room raised their hands. Unfortunately, staffing is a challenge for many of us. And so we really have to look at how to work smarter and not harder, and really have to look at how can we take off of the plates of our technologists that are actually there with the patients, actually in the front line, and take some of the work off of their hands. Because unfortunately, any of you that worked pre-PACS, worked pre-EHR, things actually seem easier back then. You opened up a chart, you saw what you needed to order, and you just went with it. And now with the EHRs, it seems like we're spending more and more time in the computer and less time with our patients. And I actually feel like the more automated we get, I see more mistakes. We scanned the wrong patient name, but I had the right patient. I did the right exam. I had the wrong name in the computer. I see more of that type of stuff because we're so glued to the screens and so glued to the minutia of the everyday activities we have to do just to scan a patient. And so my thought is, let's take a lot of that after work out of the tech's hands so that their main focus is what we're here for. We're here for those patients. We're here to take care of them. We need to get all of that other work off of their plates so they can focus on the patient. So one of the main challenges we have right now is we have less staff due to COVID. Not sure where all the techs went, but they're not in Missouri. Again, if I could see all of your faces, I'm sure you'd be nodding along with me that we just don't have the staff. A couple years ago, we all started hearing, you know, we're going to get from volume to value. We're going to make that shift, that we're not focused on our volumes, we're focused on the quality of care and making sure that we're not overscanning patients, et cetera, et cetera. I've yet to see this shift. We're still very volume focused. And unfortunately, in some of our busier hospitals, that causes us to get this factory line syndrome where we're just focused on how many patients can we get through here. So that becomes a challenge in our departments, especially because we have less staff since COVID. And every year, I feel that we have more and more regulatory compliance items put on our plates that our staffs have to do X, Y, Z that we didn't have to do 20 years ago when I was first scanning. And that's just more and more that we're putting on our staff that causes them to be less efficient. However, we're still volume focused. So we're putting more to cause their efficiency to go down, but we're expecting them to do more. And when you combine those together, less staff, more volume, less efficient, it really sets us up to have unrealistic goals. That has been a big focus of mine moving forward, is not just accepting goals that I know we can't reach because we're being asked to by levels above, of really pushing back and saying we have to have realistic goals because it's not fair to our staff to expect them to scan more patients than we even have appointment slots for. So these are all the challenges that I see amongst my CT departments, and I think it'd be safe to say that many of you probably see these same challenges. So with our challenge, in our St. Louis area, we had 3 different radiologist groups. So not only do we have the multiple hospitals, we have 3 radiologist groups that we're gonna have to try to get to agree. And I sometimes can't even get my own radiologist within the same group to agree. So we knew this was going to be a big challenge with having a standardized 3D lab. As I mentioned before, we had a variation of the CT scanners, but the scanner itself isn't the challenge. The raw data, it doesn't really matter what vendor scanner it comes from, the raw data is there. Our challenge though becomes those independent workstations. Every time you buy a CT scanner, the vendors slide in that little independent workstation, and now you're left with these workstations that are the same vendor as the scanner. So the images they produce, the post-processed 3D images or your brain perfusions, all of that look a little bit different based on the vendor. But then you have to upgrade the software. And I don't know about your organizations, but we never buy the packages to upgrade the software. We never buy the additional coverages that you get the free upgrades every year and a year after. We just buy the independent workstation and it sits working off of a DOS, you know, program when we're up here with Microsoft 10. It's just the unfortunate reality is we don't have enough capital to support that. And then we had a lack of staff knowledge on all of our workstations. We had some that knew the GE, we had some that knew the Philips, we had some that didn't even know how to post-process. So these were all the initial challenges that before we even got into the nuts and bolts of how we're going to make this 3D lab work, we had to make sure that we had our ducks in a row on these challenges. So when I approached the radiologists, kind of asked them, how do you feel about our post-processing? How would you feel about us moving on? with a 3D lab. The feedback we received back were they weren't really satisfied with the different post-processing images that were produced. I had one radiologist that he only liked the images done if it was done on an AW suite. Another one, they preferred the Philips version of the software. And so even though they're sitting at the same exact hospital, it depended which post-processing 3D workstation unit it was post-processed on, what the images looked like. So the images looked completely different. And this second dot point is kind of where the seed was planted in my head, because as the CT supervisor many years ago, I would get phone calls after hours. I would get phone calls on the weekends because I was that CT nerd that loved to post-process things. Even if it was a study that we never post-processed before, I would sit down and make 3D renderings. I would give them MIPS just because I thought it was cool. And then suddenly the radiologists want this on all of their studies. But none of the other techs really performed in this manner. They really didn't know how to post-process like that. So then the rads were letting exams sit until they can call and say, hey, Jessica, can you work this one up? I prefer to have MIPS. And it delayed care. It wasn't the best quality of care for our patients, put extra on my plate, and it made the other techs frustrated of quit working these things up because you're putting more on us because now they want them. So there was a lot of rework done because the radiologists, they only wanted stuff by certain people. And then the other concern from the radiologist was just the protocols. Each radiologist had a different protocol. Some wanted MIPS, some wanted the 3D renderings. We really had to sit down and figure out, yes, these are pretty, but what do you really need? What do you really use to make a diagnosis? Because if you just like to look at it and you don't use it, then let's not waste our time. So these were our concerns expressed from our radiologists. Mentioned before, some of the equipment concerns. The major issue we had was just the workstations. It had nothing to do with the scanner that we received the initial images off of. It was the workstations. The technologists would gravitate to the workstations they were comfortable with. In one of our facilities, the scanners are on different floors. We have one scanner up on the second floor, another one down on another floor. And there was actually a technologist that would travel to the other floor to use that workstation because they only knew the GE-AW suite. So it caused for efficiency issues when you have techs traveling to different places just because of what they're comfortable with. The big thing was just those budget constraints. We never purchased software agreements. We never kept those workstations up to par. So we weren't getting the latest and greatest on them. And so they were very far behind on software. When talking to the staff to understand their challenges, really it was just the variability in their ability to post-process. Some wanted nothing to do with it, some really liked it, some wanted to like it, but they didn't have time for it. They just wanted to focus on scanning the patients. Every year, it seems like in budget season, we're asked to just give up a little bit more. Can you give back 0.1 FTE? Can you give back 0.2? And before you know it, you've trimmed all the fat, and we're starting to cut into the core of our department. So the more we lost FTEs, the more we saw the efficiency of our CT departments decrease. And then another kind of aha moment for us was we were actually sending images out to third-party vendors and having to pay for that service. So we have a very robust vascular surgery program in one of our hospitals, and they were making dedicated stents for each patient. So we would do the AAA studies, we would measure everything and send that off for a customizable stent. Well, we were paying a third party for this. So that really kind of gave us that first stepping stone of, we're asking for capital to purchase a solution for a 3D lab. We're asking for salary dollars to staff a 3D lab, but really a small percentage of their work we can charge for, but really a lot of their work, there is no revenue back. But this stent planning it really gave us kind of that foundation of, okay, if we can save money, we can convince our C-suite that this is the route we need to go, that it's going to kind of even out in the long run. So the way we decided to solve these challenges were just with the 3D lab. We would save money by improving efficiency. Anytime the radiologist satisfaction can be improved, that's a big win. We can improve the employee satisfaction by allowing them just to focus on scanning the patients. If they don't have to scan a patient, turn to another computer, do all their post-processing, etc., they can just focus on their patient, then employee satisfaction can go up. And probably the most important is image quality. We're here to provide the best quality images for our patients so we can diagnose their issue and get them to their next step of care. So anytime we can have a standard of our image quality, that if tech A is working today and tech B is working tomorrow, we want to make sure our images look exactly the same and there's nothing that's going to be missed because someone didn't really know how to post-process those images. So on the cost savings front, stent planning was the easy one. We quantified how much we were spending, and in just 1 year at one hospital, we were spending about $72,000 on sending those images out to a third party. So that's an easy win. That's an easy way to quantify how that could pay one technologist's salary. So that kind of was our foundation of the ROI on this project. And the next solution was just really pushing that if we can transition to one solution that is a thin client, we remove all workstations and we use our technology of the cloud servers that are out there, and we get a thin client, then we can reduce the need for all these upgrades. We have multiple hospitals in our system all asking to upgrade multiple workstations at each hospital. If we can eliminate that and just keep a service contract on one solution, upgrade one, there really is a cost savings in the long run there. So that was our next kind of basis of how do we justify that this is worth the dollars. Then the big one that the finance friends really love is, as we sat and started doing time trials of how long does it take really start to finish on our appointment slots, we had some 60-minute appointment slots, things like urograms that you have to wait in between and then do the post-processing. But most of our appointment slots were 30 minutes. By the time you dress the patient, we do point of care creatinine, start an IV, do the scan, and leave your patient. We had 30 minutes built in for each time slot. Because the tech would have to then stop and post-process. So we did some time calculations and we were able to reduce those time slots to 20 minutes. Well, reducing the time slots to 20 minutes, when we looked at on average our appointment days, that allowed us to add 8 additional appointment slots per facility. And that was our big win, because now we can quantify, well, we have 8 additional slots times, I know it's all different with case mix and your contracted rates with your insurance, but times your about average amount that you get back for your CT exams, that's your real winner right there. Is if you can prove that you're adding appointment slots, it really helps you justify the salary and the initial capital up front. So the big word here is just consistency. We're able to have a consistent image quality. We're able to build relationships with the radiologist. They have their go-to person every single time they need someone to talk to. They have that person that they trust. There's less rework. We're not having to hold patients' exams overnight. The tech that's working there gets it post-processed. Nothing's waiting for that, air quotes, expert to come work on it. And then we did see less frustration and stress in the CT technologists. There were a few that I think were kind of offended. They didn't want to give this up. They wanted to do this type of work, and we just encouraged them to apply for these positions as they opened up. And so the big focus is it just frees up your CT technologist to continue scanning. If they don't have to do any of this post-processing work, if they don't have to do any of that, they can focus on the most important thing, and that's the patient. So our initial vision, we had a dedicated 3D tech. We started with our cardiac program. We do cardiac CTA, and when we first started this, it was in 2012, I believe. So back then, there really wasn't all the auto seating technology we have. So post-processing a CTA of the heart, it took some time. And if you had a tech that didn't really know what they were doing, it could take them an hour. So we decided, let's start with these because these are the most complex studies. Let's start with just one facility, work out all the bugs, and then we'll start to expand from there. So as you're talking to anyone about this, really the focus is you need to have a capital purchase. So we went with the Philips IntelliSpace portal. I'm not partial to one solution over another. It just happened to be at that time, this was a true thin client, and it had unlimited access. I didn't have to pay per user to use it. It just seemed to be the best solution for us. We wiped out all of our independent workstations. And when I say we wiped them out, you have to physically remove them from your CT departments, because if you don't, people that don't want to learn your new solution will gravitate back to those. So we literally took those out and made sure that we no longer had workstations in our department. We did have to ask for the FTE. And again, we used those financial justifications as to why we needed this FTE. And then you just need to find the physical space. And then for us with that third party, if you're sending to any third parties, you really just have to gain that physician or radiologist trust that I now have an expert, this is all they do, you can trust their measurements. Some barriers that we learned that you may struggle with, so I just like to share so that you can kind of get the wheels turning ahead of time, is we really struggled with who owns the 3D lab. Because it has to do with equipment, IT said that our CES team, or biomed as some may call them, they need to own it. They felt like it's only a bunch of servers, so IT needs to own it. So we had a lot of finger pointing there that we kind of struggled with. Because of the logistics of our organization and the scale of it, we did have 6 servers and it lived in the IHT building. And what we started to learn is most of the issues were just related to those servers. The servers needed to be rebooted. It was nothing equipment-wise. So while in the beginning, CES was the one to management, the longer we got into this, we realized most of the issues are IT. We need the servers upgraded. We need one rebooted so that we can transfer images to another, things like that. And that really is an IT function. So that's how we landed on it. So in 2012 is when this journey began. We had one technologist working just day shifts. She only averaged about 110 exams per month. And we started off very low scale of her performing 9 different types of study. We had brain perfusion, the head and necks, the runoffs, AAAs, dissections, our cardiac, urograms, facial reconstruction, and MSK work. When I say that this position, they don't really generate revenue, they actually can in some areas. Most of these CPT codes, if it's an angio, it's all encompassed in that CPT code. You can't charge for anything. But when you get down in that area of facial reconstruction or MSK work, as long as the order states that they want 3D reconstructions, as long as the report, the radiologist dictates in there that these were performed on an independent workstation, there actually is a very small charge you can charge for. So what we started learning is we really needed to go out and promote this with certain surgeons that might want a 3D recon, and then we have to integrate it into our EHR. So we integrated, we use Epic, that only on those studies that it's not auto built into the CPT, we have a little checkbox that says, would you like 3D reconstructions? And if they check it, that generates the order. And then the radiologist dictates that this was done on a 3D, on an independent workstation, so we can charge that extra charge. So what we did is we had just the 3D lab was at one of our hospitals, and We started very archaic and we were faxing papers back and forth. So we have the outlying hospitals in the St. Louis area. We told them, you don't post-process anything. As soon as you're done with the exam, you send it to that IntelliSpace portal and fax our 3D lab tech. That lasted about a week, and she's like, these faxes have got to go. So we developed in our PACS system a folder, and the technologist, when they were done, they would end it in Epic, our EHR, and they would place it in this 3D lab folder. They wouldn't verify the exam. They left it unverified, but they would just put it in this folder. That took it off their work list, placed it in the 3D lab work list, and then they knew to post-process it. After the 3D lab post-processes it, gets their images in it, then they verify it, and that sends it to the radiologist. So that was just a little learning we had. I doubt anyone starting nowadays would start with a fax, but at the time, I know it doesn't seem that long ago, but at the time we thought fax would have been the right solution, and that miserably failed. It only took till about 2013 that we said, all right, we've got this smoothly running. I think we need to add another technologist. So we brought in another tech and staggered their shifts. By this time, they were up to about 390 exams per month. We added different applications. Now we started adding in the stent planning. We were doing the stent planning before, but we really had to get not so much the radiologists, we had to get the vascular surgeons on board, that they were comfortable that these techs knew what they were doing. So what we did for the first 6 months is every exam that they post-processed, we also sent to the third party, got that report back, scanned it into PACS, and showed them that our measurements were apples to apples what the third party was producing. So we did that for about 6 months and met with the surgeons, continued to show that to them until they got to the point that said, okay, we believe you, we don't need to send to this other company, you guys are just as good. So we did have to have a little validation process, and that's what kind of delayed adding stent planning. We integrated virtual colon, TAVR, and we had the benefit of one of our 3D lab technologists was actually an MR technologist as well. So we said, you know what, let's start post-processing some of these MRI exams, and maybe we can benefit there as well. So we brought in some of those exams in MRI. Now, granted, in MRI, they have more time, their scans take longer, they have more time to do some of the post-processing, but there were some such as breast and things like that that took a long time. And so we brought that over to the 3D lab. We brought PET in. Our solution has the ability to fuse the PET images. So we said, why are we having the PET techs do all of this? We brought PET in. We brought nuclear medicine in the sense of the stress tests. We had AutoQuant on there. So we really tried to look at how can this 3D lab benefit all of our departments and really allow our working technologists to focus on the patient and take all of that extra work and put it in the 3D lab. And then we started introducing ablations, which have a lot of post-processing work with. So we brought that on board. And when we got all of these running smoothly with the two technologists, we really basically doubled our volume of work that we were able to perform. So here's just a snapshot in the beginning that we had just the two technologists for these years, and you'll see year after year and of course our organic volume is growing as well. But as they got more comfortable with each application and we could add more applications, they really started cranking out more exams. And in 2017, we realized that we're really getting to a point, a tipping point of two technologists performing almost 13,000 exams a year. We started this to become efficient, and we started this to take some off of the CT tech's plates, but now we've just piled it on our 3D labs plates, and they're busting at the seams. So we did say, we need to look at this. We need a third tech. So we started tracking. Feedback we were getting is we were still leaving some exams at the end of the day, and then they would have to come in the next day and post-process those. We were averaging about 7 exams held over. And so again, where's the efficiency in that? If we're letting things sit over, we're not being very efficient. So we need to look at adding a third tech or reevaluating what we're post-processing in our department to see if we're just dumping everything on the 3D lab, and maybe some of these things don't need to be in the lab. As we started looking at adding a third tech, we kind of were on a cusp of, yes, we could use the third tech, but do we really need a third tech for 7 exams held over a day? Or do we also need to grow the applications that we're using as well? And then the more we were working, we started noticing that the physicians, they call our 3D lab when they would get stuck. There's some things that the physicians, they don't need the 3D lab to post-process. They can just do really quickly in packs. They can launch the 3D viewer and do it themselves. But if they got stuck, they weren't coming to the directors anymore. They weren't going to the CT techs to ask. They were just calling up the 3D lab. So that kind of really started spinning our wheels on, we can use the 3D lab technologists as super users for onboarding new physicians and for kind of being that outreach to our physicians. So in addition to asking to add a third tech, we decided we really need to add more applications. So if you remember in those first couple of slides, we were up to maybe 19 types of exams that we were performing. We went all in, asked for the capital, and upgraded our system. I know this slide's really small, but it's more so just to show you the vast amount of exams that our 3D lab are post-processing now. We have CT. We do have some ultrasound applications. We haven't gotten there yet at the lab, but we do have the applications available. Nuke Med, MRI. We have some applications that it doesn't matter what modality it comes from. But we added all of these applications so that we can continue to provide that support, so that, again, the main goal of having a 3D lab is that your working technologists are just obtaining the images. They're doing nothing more than that. So after we added these applications to show that we had enough work for that third tech, in 2018, we added the third tech. The complaints we kind of got were, this is great during the day, but after hours, we really don't have that same continuum of care. And one of my goals is, it doesn't matter what time you come into one of our hospitals, you should have the same quality care regardless if it's night, weekends, evenings, or day. And I wasn't living up to that with only having a day tech. So we expanded into the evening. Most of the work you do that needs post-processing aren't coming in late at night, with the exception of your CTAs and your code strokes for the brain perfusion. So we have really focused on making sure our night techs are competent in those 2 exams. And the good news is, the more AI that comes out, we have an AI that can read the CTAs now and literally alert the ER within seconds if there's an LVO or something like that. So the more AI that comes out after hours, while they're not getting the full-blown images, they're still getting the quality of care. So we haven't really gotten into nights yet, but we did add an evening tech. And then we added designated roles. We said, okay, we've got these 3 techs. We need someone that can be the point person for the radiologist. We need someone that can be the point person for our scan protocols. What we noticed is the 3D lab techs would escalate to me, you know, I can't post-process this because the bolus is horrible. They're late every single time. And so the challenge back to them was, well, if you're noticing this one location is late every time, why don't you educate them on how we can adjust their protocol? Because you can't turn garbage into glitter, you know, if garbage in is garbage out. So we really kind of empowered them to say, hey, maybe you need to educate them on their protocols. And then we decided, well, one person can really work with me on educating me as the director. Hey, this is this new application we've got. It's working out great. Can you go market it to this audience? So we really kind of empowered each technologist to kind of have their own niche of what they're focused on to make sure that the 3D lab is providing the best care to everybody. So when we added that, again, our volumes continue to grow. I do have an asterisk on 2020 because unfortunately when COVID hit, we closed a lot of our outpatient departments down. So you'll see that volume drop, but I'm very happy to see that it did not take long for our volumes to rebound. And we're still incrementally growing our 3D lab volumes. So our big issues, I'm not done with this yet, even though this has been 10 plus years in the making. I'm not happy with the lab yet, and I'm still working on how can we grow this. So as I mentioned, consistency in care is big. I don't think that the time of day should matter. You can't control when you have a stroke. You can't control when you need health care. So we should be able to provide the best quality of care all the time. So at this point, we do not have a 3D lab on the weekends. So we are looking at, can we get to a volume that this can be staffed over the weekends? Can we staff into the night? And I'm very big on lean processes, and so double processing makes no sense to me. Right now, what happens on nights, because we do have the AI technology to help with strokes, and we use a Nighthawk service for our reads. So they're basically prelim reads, and when our radiologists come in at the first in the morning, then they read and actually provide the full dictation. So our 3D lab, they come in at 6:30 in the morning and they post-process everything from the night before, but that's kind of rework in my mind. So I do think having nights would be huge. We're just not quite there that the night volume justifies having a tech here the entire time. And then we kind of use the 3D lab to help solve problems. So as I mentioned, they're more than just post-processing. We use them to help train the radiologist and the cardiologist, because our cardiologists use our thin client for auto quants for their stress test. There are portal super users. We call it the portal. That's the program we use for our post-processing. They will train anyone that needs to be trained on it. Some CAD programs that isn't contained in the portal, but we still use, make them the super users. That way they have, they're more educated on that program, on the images coming in, etc. So there are super users. And we actually kind of thought outside of the box of using it for storage solution. They help with our TAVRs and our Super Ds. And our biggest win here is we use our thin client solution for PACS downtime. If PACS is down, but the internet is up, because this is just a internet program that has servers elsewhere, we can use that for downtime, or if someone after hours needs to look at our images. So I'm not done yet. Again, I want to continue to look at expanding our 3D lab, have 24-hour support. We thought about, could we bring in some non-SSM imaging centers and post-process for them? And then my ultimate goal is, right now this lab is only supporting the hospitals in St. Louis. We want to look at expanding outside of our St. Louis SSM facilities to Oklahoma, Illinois, and Wisconsin. So with that, I just have some images to show, sample images that our lab puts together, just from some of the brochures that I go out and show, but just kind of to show some of our surgeons or anyone that might want to use this, why you might want to order 3D lab images, because we can show you different things that the axial, coronal, sagittal images can't show you. So we just have some facial work here where we can bring in the soft tissues, we can remove the soft tissues. We can do lung volumes for emphysema patients. Of course, we do all of the cardiac studies. Here's some more cardiac studies of just when we post-process for ablations for those surgeons, looking at all of our coronary vessels for any stenosis or anything. This is probably the slide I get the most feedback from, because some people are shocked to know that our technologists are making all of those measurements. But when you have dedicated techs that this is all they do, we can trust them, their measurements. We do bookmark all of these images. So the radiologists, when they launch it on PACS, they can adjust these measurements if they disagree. They still have to put eyes on it. So it's not that the technologist is dictating the images or telling the rads the numbers, but they're saving that much time for the rads because now the radiologist just has to open, give it a quick look, see if they agree, disagree. If they disagree, they can adjust those lines, but most of the time they're going with the numbers that our technologists are providing them. Here's a stroke patient, and we provide all of the measurements for them to just help them read a little bit more efficiently. This is probably the best example of those images that not everyone knows that they can order 3D on, but this could help a surgeon. This could help someone kind of plan how they want to perform the surgery, or do they need to perform surgery? Can we just, of course, this you can't just let it fix on its own, but if people don't know this exists and all they have to do is check that with 3D box, then they're not going to order it. So that's where me as the director going out and showing images helps educate our referring offices that this is a solution for you and why you should utilize it. And we do kidney volumes, and another for the orthopods. Again, this is why you need to click that box, because I can now show you, these are static images, but of course, if this was in PACS, they can rotate that clavicle all the way around, see exactly how that break is. And that's the real benefit of having a 3D lab that is an expert at this and presenting these images to your referring offices. So that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, and hopefully we can help spark some interest in you opening a 3D lab or help you grow your 3D lab to be a little bit bigger.
Great, thanks, Jessica. We've actually got a few questions coming. The first one is, what qualifications do you require for a 3D lab technologist?
Sure. So originally, because this kind of stems from the inefficiencies and the issues we noticed in CT, originally we started with you need to be a CT tech. First and foremost, you have to be a tech. And the great thing about this being an after the fact type of position is when we interview technologists, I'll actually ask them to post-process something, because I expect you to have some basic knowledge. You have to know your cross-sectional anatomy. CT techs know how to do basic MIPS. They know some may not be all that versed in the 3D volume rendering, but they should have basic knowledge. So we'll just ask them, because you're not producing any radiation, just post-process this. Let me just see, I can kind of watch your thought process, how you're doing that. So it started with CT. As we brought in other modalities, I found some benefits in having a CT/MRI tech. Could an MRI tech do it? Yes, I think they could, because they have that cross-sectional anatomy. But I think that's first and foremost the most important, is you have to really understand your anatomy, primarily your cross-sectional anatomy.
Okay, so with the current staffing shortages, have you explored training non-imaging personnel to post-process in the 3D lab?
We have thought about it. I think all of us are trying to figure out how to overcome the shortages. So even in some of kind of similar to this, but different, in some of my MRI departments where I've had MRI positions open for 6-7 months, we've hired MRI tech assistants to work alongside our MRI tech. So I think that's the way a lot of places are going, is kind of thinking, do you have to have a technologist? I haven't gotten gutsy enough to try that here, because again, I think that cross-sectional anatomy is critical to where you need to have someone that understands CT. I had mentioned that we had some complaints of, I can never post-process this hospital because they're always late. Their bolus is terrible. And if you're not a CT tech, how are you going to educate that department that, hey, you're missing, you're late every time, or to identify you're early every time? So even though I think if you found someone sharp enough, you probably could eventually train them, I personally wouldn't. I think you need to be at minimum a CT tech.
Okay, that's great, thanks. So if you launched a 3D lab today, what would you change with the process?
What would I change with the process? If I did this all over again, I think just the infrastructure, that's probably the biggest things we learned. The staff have been great, and actually this is probably the one position that when an opening opens up, I had a technologist retire about 4 or 5 months ago, and in today's climate, you guys all know, you'll post a position, they'll sit open for months sometimes. This is the one position that everyone runs to. So I think the staff side of it's great. My buy-in from the radiologist, it was the most hiccups were just the infrastructure itself of, I'm not IT background, so I can't help when those issues happen. When we first initiated this, nothing was remote. I think it would be a lot easier nowadays because we're all used to remote since the wonderful COVID caused us to kind of fast forward in that aspect. So I think just those things that you probably can't learn until you are faced with them, but there's just those challenges on the infrastructure side.
Okay, that's great. Another question we've just come in is, you mentioned you have a service for strokes. Is this why a lot of the volume you perform for CT is not CTA head neck exams?
Yes, so just recently, I don't even think we've had it for a year. It might have been a little more than a year, but a lot of our volume now for CTA and even brain perfusion, and we just started introducing it while we went in post-process for a non-con stroke. We have a totally separate AI software that we send our images to them, and it immediately alerts you if there's a stroke. So that isn't our highest volume. I would say our highest volume right now really is just those bread and butter exams that, yes, they don't take forever to do. Urograms, TAVRs do take a little while, and we have seen a lot of growth in our TAVRs, but just some of those abdominal work scans, even just our PEs, even though they're basic MIPS, we said, you know what, techs back at the scanners, you guys don't need to do any of this, just send it to the 3D lab. So as I mentioned, some CT staff, they don't like that because it feels like we're taking that more complex part away from them, but we really try to take everything off the CT tech's plate. So they're literally just obtaining those axial cuts, that raw data, and that's all they're responsible for.
Okay, another question here is, how do you track productivity from the technologists that perform the study to the technologists that perform the 3D, and who takes the credit?
Sure. So because we're post-processing for so many hospitals, the workload credit for the scan itself, scanning the patient, that goes back to their hospital. And even when I had mentioned that if it's a MSK or facial bones or something along that sorts where they have that additional charge, that goes back to the performing hospital as well. The 3D lab, we just track their volume, and I know it's archaic and I need to find a better way, but they literally have a little spreadsheet in their office that each day they track. Each technologist marks down, you know, I did 6 CTA todays, I did this, and we input it in a master spreadsheet. Their time is divvied out. So we worked with our HR department, and so their time is divvied out and charged back to each hospital, but it's not volume based. So basically we have 3 techs, and 2 techs, half their time hits one hospital, 1 tech, half their time hits one hospital, half their time hits another hospital. The other tech, half their time hits a different hospital, and it's just divvied out fairly. I don't nitpick and say, but we post-process 800 exams for you and 900 for you, so you need to, we don't take it down to that nitty gritty. We just evenly blanket, put them across all the hospitals they're post-processing for. But the actual revenue, the statistic, the productivity statistic, that goes to the scanning department. They earn that.
Okay, that's great. And one last question is, how did you track the number of exams?
And right now it's just manual. We just have basically a printed out spreadsheet at each of their workstation that they keep track of what they did that day, and then it gets put into a spreadsheet that I monitor. So I can speak to it if finance or CET comes back and says, why are we paying this salary for technologists that aren't, air quotes, earning a stat? I can show them, well, this is the volume of work they're doing. If they didn't do this work, then the techs back at the hospitals have to do that work, and then that volume is going to decrease. So it's just having the knowledge to know how to basically justify it and speak to it.
Okay, that's perfect. Have you got anything else to add before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I know I shared a lot of information here, so my contact is up. Please feel free to reach out to me. Again, this is probably one of my projects that has been so close to me that I'm passionate about, in case you couldn't tell. And it's one of those things, even some of my coworkers or even some of the techs, they're scared to change things in the 3D lab because, as they call it, it's my baby. So I'm happy to answer any other questions anyone has, or if you have a 3D lab and you're running into challenges, or if you have a 3D lab that's working great and you do something differently that I didn't share, please reach out, because by no means do I think our lab is perfect, but I am very proud of how far we've come in the time. So thank you for listening today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jessica, for your time today and such a great and informative presentation. As promised, the answer to today's trivia question is Garfield. So congratulations to our winner, Catherine Hall. And just a quick reminder, you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 ARRT Category A CE credit by the AHRA, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Please visit icewebinars.live for more details of all our upcoming ICE webinars and complimentary registration. Thank you all again for your time today, and we hope you have a great July the 4th.